switching our clocks back and forth. Let's end the need to fall back and spring forward for good. I don't always agree with President Trump and with former Senator, now Secretary Rubio, but I sure do agree about this. I yield the floor.
The senator from Florida.
I'd like to recognize my co-sponsor from Alabama, Senator Tuberville.
Mr. President.
The senator from Alabama.
Mr. President, I come to the floor today to once again talk about the outdated practice of changing our clocks twice a year. This weekend, my constituents back home in Alabama and across America will be forced to change their clocks. As a result, it will be dark in Washington, D.C. at 5 p.m. next week. In the 5 years I've served here in the Senate, making daylight savings time permanent is the number one issue that I hear about back home. I'm proud to have joined my colleague, Rick Scott, early this year in reintroducing the Sunshine Protection Act to make daylight savings time permanent on the federal level. Unfortunately, it has been brought to the floor for a vote. So here I am advocating once again to make the outdated practice of changing our clock a thing of the past. For nearly 60 years, Americans have changed their clocks back and forth twice a year, but the roots of daylight saving time trace back much further. Daylight saving time was introduced during World War I and then reused again during World War II as a temporary way to help conserve fuel and energy. Following the ends of both wars, the decision was to spring forward and fall back was returned to individual states. It was until 1966 when the system of changing now was made permanent. Clock twice a year might have made sense in the 60s, but it doesn't make sense anymore. The twice a year time change doesn't make sense today. We know the devastating impact of the disruption from so-called standard time has on Americans' health. Studies have suggested that disruption of sleep patterns due to time changes increases the risk of cardiovascular disease and physical injury. Northwestern Medical found that the fall back and the spring forward are connected to a 6% spike in fatal car accidents and 24% higher risk of heart attacks. Think about that. Additionally, the long-term health effects linked to changing our clocks include weight gain, cluster headaches, and depression. You would think we would listen to all that. Bottom line, shifting our clocks disrupts sleep patterns, and it has been proven time and time again to be harmful to the health. Thanks to RFK Jr.'s great work of HHS, a lot of Americans are taking their health more seriously and by trying to eat healthier and to get more sleep. Switching the clock back and forth is the exact opposite of making America healthy again movement that RFK Jr. has championed. It's bad for sleep, it's bad for nutrition, and it's bad for overall health. And for that reason, I push back and try to get this on the floor sooner or later, and I yield back to my colleague, Rick Scott.
Mr. President.
Senator from Florida.
I want to thank Senators Whitehouse and Tuberville for their support. Our Sunshine Protection Act is a bipartisan, bicameral bill that will allow states to end the twice-yearly time change and make daylight savings time the national year-round standard. In 2018, when I was governor of Florida, I signed legislation that will allow the state of Florida to stop the practice of changing the clocks. I've been working to get this passed since I've been in the Senate so the people of Florida, not the federal government, can make this choice for the families of Florida. Nearly 24 other states have joined Florida in choosing to lock the clock, pending the federal approval that will come by passing the Sunshine Protection Act, while still allowing other states to opt out if they wish. This bill is about states' rights. It allows the people of each state to choose what best fits their needs and the needs of their families. In Florida, that's permanent daylight savings time. I hear from Floridians on this constantly. I'm sure many of you have heard from your constituents as well. The American people are sick and tired of changing their clocks twice a year. It's confusing, unnecessary, and completely outdated. It's an understatement to say our nation has changed since the United States began changing the clocks over a century ago. For example, American households have electricity now. We also have self-driving cars, computers, cell phones. Now changing the clocks twice a year proves more of an annoyance to families than a benefit to them. The American people love having an extra hour of sunlight, especially in my state of Florida, where that means more time to enjoy the outdoors and activities with family. Studies also show the potential for reduced cardiac issues, strokes, seasonal depression, reduced robberies, and benefits to the agricultural and general economies with an extra hour of sunlight. And with President Trump committed to finally lock the clock, we can finally get this done for the American people. This bill is completely about individual states having the right to make their own decisions. I ask all of my colleagues to support the passage of the Sunshine Protection Act to make a common sense change that will simplify and benefit the lives of Americans and allow the people of each state to choose what is best for themselves and their families. And I yield to my colleague from Arkansas.
Mr. President.
The senator from Arkansas.
In January of 1974, millions of Americans traveled to work in school in darkness. Commuter trains were delayed. School children carried flashlights. Tragically, some of these kids were struck by cars and killed while walking to school in the dark. One woman from Long Island, speaking to the New York Times, summed up the black mood of the nation. "It's the end," she said. "I can't cope anymore. I'm just staying in bed." What calamity had befallen our nation? Had Soviet Russia finally attacked America? Had we suffered a nationwide power outage? Were the heavens conspiring to plunge our nation into darkness? No. As it turns out, the answer was more mundane and foolish. A few months earlier, Congress, in its eternal wisdom, had imposed a top-down change on every American's daily life, eliminating standard time and adopting daylight savings time year-round. Such a change to the nation's clocks had never happened before, except as an emergency rationing measure during wartime. While briefly popular, it proved deeply unpopular when reality set in. According to opinion polls, support for permanent daylight savings time fell by 30 percentage points in just 3 months. Only a few weeks after it was implemented, it was underwater. Congress beat a hasty retreat, repealing the law and changing the clocks back in October. What was supposed to be a 2-year experiment ended in abject failure after less than 1 year. It's said that those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it. And that's what would happen if Congress passes the so-called Sunshine Protection Act, once again ending standard time and imposing daylight savings time year-round. If permanent daylight savings time becomes the law of the land, it will again make winter a dark and dismal time for millions of Americans. By moving the clock back an hour in winter, permanent daylight savings time would push winter sunrises to an absurdly late hour, depriving Americans of morning sunshine that's essential for our safety and well-being. For many Arkansans, permanent daylight savings time would mean the sun wouldn't rise until after 8 or even 8:30 a.m. during the dead of winter. 3 months out of the year, kids in towns like Bentonville, Fayetteville, and Fort Smith would start school ahead of the sun. Americans in northern states and on the western side of time zones would be even worse off. For instance, the sun wouldn't rise until nearly 9 o'clock during winter in Seattle. In Grand Rapids, the sun would rise as late as 9:15 a.m. And in Williston, North Dakota, they would not see the sun till almost 9:45 a.m. The darkness of permanent daylight savings time would be especially harmful for school children and working Americans. As we saw in 1974, kids would either walk to school in the pitch black, or schools would have to push back start times. The choice would be between danger on the one hand and disruption on the other. Meanwhile, construction workers, farmers, and others who rise before the sun or who need the sun to work would be penalized. These workers might go 3, 4, even 5 hours in the morning without seeing the sun, which would hurt their quality of life and potentially their safety in the workplace. Then, of course, there are the health consequences of permanent daylight savings time. The senators from Alabama and Florida correctly indicate that clock changes can be bad for health. But the best evidence suggests that the natural rhythms of our internal body clocks align more closely with standard time than daylight savings time. A shift to permanent daylight savings time would make it harder to go to sleep at night and harder to wake up in the morning. Some of the nation's top medical associations, including the American Academy of Sleep Medicine, the American Medical Association, the American Academy of Neurology, and the American College of Chest Physicians, have called for daylight savings time to be abolished, not extended. As one sleep scientist put it, of all the options available to us, permanent daylight savings time is the worst solution. Of course, the advocates for permanent daylight savings time try to put, well, a sunny face on this bill. Back in 2022, the senator from Massachusetts argued that it would mean more daylight hours and more smiles. And by the way, since the senator from Rhode Island mentioned it, let me say a word about what happened in 2022. We've heard from him that the Senate unanimously passed this bill. It's true as far as it goes, but the story is a little more complicated than that. To let you in on how things operate, when senators want to seek unanimous consent to pass a bill without a recorded vote, as my friends are doing today, an email goes out to all other Senate offices asking if a senator objects. I didn't personally object in 2022 for two reasons. First, I hadn't adequately communicated to my staff the depth of my opposition to this bill. Second, because of a miscommunication, I expected another senator who also opposed the bill to object. I take full responsibility for this mistake, though the search for someone else to blame is actively ongoing. A chief suspect, as usual, may be the Republican floor secretary. In any case, it's only a mistake if you don't have time to fix it. And fortunately, I fixed it later that year with like-minded friends in the House. Despite that setback, the proponents of permanent daylight savings time refuse to, if you will, let the sun set on this bill. They allege, as we've heard, that the change would stimulate the economy and even save the environment by reducing energy use. On the contrary, permanent daylight savings time would have negligible effects on energy use, as indicated by most studies and plain common sense. Any reduction in electricity use in the afternoon will be counterbalanced, of course, by increased use in the morning. It's largely 6 in one hand and half a dozen in the other. As to the supposed economic benefits, no doubt that a handful of industries would gain from the bill. That's why they've lobbied so hard for it over the years. This bill would benefit, for example, outdoor entertainment venues, seaside resorts, and bars. My good friends from Alabama and Florida sponsor this legislation, and they're representing their states well by doing so. An extra hour in the winter for the resorts of South Florida, the beautiful golf courses in southern Alabama and across the state of Florida, or deep sea fishing in the Gulf of America or the Atlantic would be welcomed by many of the residents of these communities. As for my friends from Massachusetts and Rhode Island, have you ever spent a winter in Boston or Providence? The sun disappears there barely after 4 p.m. Little wonder they've joined the effort. These senators represent states that overwhelmingly benefit from year-round daylight savings time because of their latitude and longitude. I understand and I respect their positions, but as is often the case, these highly concentrated benefits for a few industries in a few regions are offset by widely distributed costs across many more industries throughout the entire country. And that's to say nothing of moms sending their kids to school in the dark of night. So why should we repeat history? It's probably because we've forgotten it. Most people don't remember the permanent daylight savings time debacle of 1974. And just about everyone hates to spring forward and fall back, as the saying goes. I don't like the biannual clock changes any more than the rest of you do. But unless we're willing to adopt permanent standard time and sacrifice the extra hour of evening light in the spring and summer for Little League ball games and summer vacations across the country, there's just not much to be done. which is, when you think about it, a fundamentally conservative outlook. Not every human problem has a legislative solution. Sometimes we have to live with an uneasy compromise between competing priorities and interests. That's doubly true when considering how the movement of the stars and the planets affect the lives of 350 million souls spread across our vast continental nation. It brings to mind the story of King Canute, who wanted to teach his sycophants a lesson about the limits of mankind's power. He famously set his throne on the seashore and forbade the tide from coming in. Of course, the tide nonetheless came in, and as one historian recounted, disrespectfully drenched the king's feet and shins. The moral of the story, the king reminded his fawning court, is that the power of kings is empty and worthless, and there is no king worthy of name save him by whose will heaven, earth, and sea obey eternal laws. Good King Canute's wise words are as true now as they were then. No earthly ruler, not even this Congress, can alter the movements of the heavens. Not today, not in 1974, not ever. Therefore, I oppose the Sunshine Protection Act and will always oppose any effort to adopt daylight savings time year-round. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Senator from Massachusetts.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that privileges of the floor be granted to the following member of my staff, Henry Wu, for today, October 28th, 2025.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor. Hold on.
I can't even give the floor away. But, Mr. President, for the
Democratic whip.
Thank you, Mr. President. For the last 2 months, the people of Illinois have been living under President Trump's so-called Operation Midway Blitz. I have watched it up close. I've seen its victims, I've seen its methods, and I want to tell you that this Operation Midway Blitz is trampling over the residents of Illinois' constitutional rights and civil liberties. This reckless campaign is not aimed at public safety. It's a calculated show of political theater and force designed to spread fear and terror in our communities. Every weekend since this operation began, I've returned to Chicago to visit these communities, to meet with members and leaders that have been targeted by Donald Trump with federal militarized agents. I reported back on what I've seen and heard on this floor for weeks now. And what I see time and time again are good people whose only desire is to raise their children, go to work, and contribute to their communities. These same people are now afraid to leave their homes, walk to school, church, grocery store, a restaurant, out of fear of being caught in one of these cruel raids. The president insists his immigrant enforcement operations focus on the worst of the worst. Oh, you've heard him over and over again. At his rallies, he would give the speeches, and he would rail about the rapists, the murderers, the terrorists, the criminally insane, these immigrants. We've got to stop them. Well, I can tell you this. More than 70% of the people who've been detained have no criminal record whatsoever. American citizens, some, workers and parents with clean records, peaceful protesters, community members carrying whistles, even children. Federal agents are sweeping up anyone they encounter, including bystanders who pause to record their activities and scrambling later to justify the detentions. When you ask what happens to an individual who disappears from one of these scenes, you wait, sometimes for hours, sometimes for days, to find out where they've been taken. These actions violate due process, full stop. A democracy cannot survive a law enforcement strategy of arrest now and ask questions later. And the reach of these actions has only grown more brazen. Federal agents have confronted people outside child care centers and schools. Some Head Start programs have moved online to protect families, and children have been zip-tied and yanked away from their families. And in many cases, peaceful protesters have been met with tear gas. At Funston Elementary School near Logan Square, an entire playground had to be evacuated. Residents who locked arms to protect the neighbors were gassed in their own streets. U.S. District Court Judge Sarah Ellis issued a temporary restraining order early this month prohibiting agents from using tear gas indiscriminately on peaceful protesters, journalists, or anyone else not posing an immediate threat to law enforcement. And the orders of court for these people, these law enforcement agents, sent in by President Trump to wear video cameras like so many police do every day routinely has been largely ignored. It's time for this court order to be enforced. Just this weekend, chemical canisters were thrown at a crowd of residents that gathered in the old Irving Park neighborhood of Chicago. For what reason? Was it a terrorist meeting? No, it was a children's Halloween block party. And they threw in tear gas canisters. The concerned onlookers and their children watched as Border Patrol agents tackled a landscaper to the ground and arrested him on a resident's front lawn. Agents then deployed multiple tear gas canisters at the neighbors without warning, and even arrested one unsuspecting resident in his late 60s who had just returned from a morning run. Video footage shows the agents' recklessness, their seeming disregard for the court order, and their ongoing violations of due process. Mr. President, it is hard to describe what is happening here, but I don't have to. It's all captured on videotape. Our armed forces are banned from using tear gas on the battlefield, but ICE and CBP have no problem using it on Main Street in Chicago, Illinois. Recent footage even shows Gregory Bovino, the Border Patrol Commander-in-Large who's been tasked with leading Operation Midway Blitz, deploying a tear gas canister on a crowd of peaceful protesters in Little Village with no advance warning. Despite a court order, no advance warning. DHS was quick to publish statements on social media regarding the incident, and they stated that, quote, a mob of rioters provoked the attack. The video shows that is a lie. Judge Ellis called Mr. Bovino to court this morning to answer for federal agents' continued indiscriminate use of tear gas in the streets of Chicago, pepper spray, other excessive force. She opened the hearing by reading her previous order out loud. Giving recent events, she wondered whether her order wasn't clear. Immigration agents didn't bother to read it, or if they read it and understood it, they decided to ignore it, to challenge the authority of the court. Judge Ellis said, and I quote, kids dressed in Halloween costumes walking to a parade do not elicit an immediate threat to the safety of a law enforcement officer. They just don't. At the hearing, she instructed Bovino to appear before the court to provide daily reports moving forward. Bovino also agreed to undergo training for body cameras and begin wearing one as soon as Friday. In light of these alarming abuses, I'm working to fulfill my role under the Constitution as a member of Congress with the authority to conduct oversight of the executive branch. The Trump administration claims to be the most transparent in American history, but when Senator Duckworth and I recently arrived at the Broadview ICE Processing Center to perform oversight, we were barred from viewing it. If this was truly a lawful operation targeted on public safety threats, the rapists, the murderers, the terrorists, the criminally insane, they wouldn't stop us from seeing who was being held. DHS would welcome oversight. Instead, they hide. What do they not want us and the American people to see? The Trump administration has turned federal agencies into tools of political intimidation. They have targeted cities and states run by Democrats who didn't vote for the president in the last election. Operation Midway Blitz is a desecration of all the basic liberties guaranteed by the Constitution. But Chicagoans and Illinoisans are not backing down. We have survived a flood, we have survived a fire, we have survived disco night in Comiskey Park, and we'll survive this as well. We are linking arms and demanding accountability, and they are refusing to be silent in face of intimidation and injustice. I'm going to continue to be part of that effort. There is a guarantee under this Constitution of freedom of speech, and as long as we are engaged in nonviolent activity, that Constitution protects us. The people of Chicago and Illinois deserve so much better. They deserve a federal government that honors one of its highest duties, the duties to defend the rights and freedoms of all people. I'll continue to do everything I can to try and ensure our government once again lives up to that promise, and I hope my colleagues will join me. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
The senator from Massachusetts.
Mr. President, American families are struggling to pay for groceries and rent. Federal workers are missing paychecks. Americans across the country are watching as their health insurance premiums skyrocket. But what is President Donald Trump focused on? He just pardoned a convicted crypto billionaire who helped the Trump family get even richer. Changpeng Zhao, known as CZ, founded Binance, a giant crypto exchange that became a home for terrorists, child abusers, and other criminals. Both Republican and Democratic policymakers have been ringing the alarm on Binance for years. 2 years ago, several of my Republican colleagues warned that this crypto platform was facilitating, quote, significant illicit finance activity, close quote, and that it could be, quote, be providing material support to entities engaged in terrorism under federal law or being willfully blind to the fact that it may be doing so. Another one of my Republican colleagues warned that CZ was misleading the public about Binance's operations in China. Republicans and Democrats were right to be worried. Binance facilitated financing for terrorist organizations like ISIS, Hamas, and Al-Qaeda. It opened the spigot for Iran. Binance made it easier to finance child sexual abuse. One Binance employee even wrote that they needed a banner that said, quote, "Is washing drug money too hard these days? Come to Binance. We got cake for you." Binance put its profits ahead of following the law and ahead of America's national security. This was criminal activity. Binance pleaded guilty to multiple criminal charges and was required to pay a penalty of more than $4 billion. CZ pleaded guilty to criminal charges and went to prison for willfully failing to maintain an effective money laundering program that could have prevented financing these terrorists and drug traffickers. Oh, but CZ got a lucky break. A month after he was released from prison, Donald Trump was elected president, and CZ had bet on the right horse. Remember, CZ is still the biggest shareholder in Binance. And right before the election, Binance reportedly offered to strike a crypto business deal with the Trump family. When Trump launched his own crypto venture, Binance allegedly wrote the code. And now all of this is paying off big time for CZ, Binance, and the Trump family. In May, a United Arab Emirates investment firm used the Trump family's stablecoin to buy a $2 billion stake in Binance. And President Trump and his family will make millions of dollars in fees and interest off just that one deal. In the middle of all this, CZ applies for a pardon, and last Friday, Donald Trump gave it to him. When asked about his pardon of CZ, the president said that, quote, "A lot of people say he wasn't guilty of anything." But one of my Republican colleagues rightly said, quote, "He was convicted, he is not innocent." Once again, President Trump has shown the American people that he is willing to turn a blind eye to money flowing to terrorists and child abusers so long as it lines his own pockets. Pardoning convicted crypto billionaires sends a message. If you have money and the right connections, you don't have to follow the law. You get a special deal after you've broken the law. Congress needs to stop this kind of corruption. Today, we can send a message that President Trump's pardon is wrong. We also have an opportunity to head off more corruption as Congress considers crypto market structure legislation. If Senate Republicans don't let us fix this, then the Senate Republicans own this corruption and lawlessness. Mr. President, I yield the floor to my colleague.
Mr. President.
The senator from California.
Mr. President, I rise today in support of Senator Warren's resolution condemning President Trump's decision to pardon Changpeng Zhao. Last week, President Trump once again put his wealthy allies, family members, and business partners ahead of the public trust when he granted a pardon to the founder of Binance. In 2023, Mr. Zhao was sentenced to prison after his company pleaded guilty to serious crimes, including failing to prevent money laundering and letting billions of dollars flow through Binance to sanctioned regimes and criminals to facilitate child sex abuse and drug trafficking and terrorism. At the time, the Treasury Department estimated that Binance had allowed over 1.5 million currency trades that violated American sanctions, including hundreds of millions of dollars that shirked sanctions against Iran, against Syria, against Cuba, and against Russia. For these crimes, Binance paid one of the largest fines in U.S. history, $4.3 billion in fines. And yet, after serving only a fraction of his sentence, President Trump stepped in to grant Zhao a pardon and wipe his slate clean. Why? Why do such a thing? Because Mr. Zhao is part of a wide web of financial interests tied to the president and his allies. That's why, including a crypto venture that poured billions into Binance. The president's pardon came after a stablecoin from World Liberty Financial, the Trump family crypto venture, was used to purchase a $2 billion stake in Binance, marking the most significant use to date of that Trump family stablecoin, and once again increasing the value of the Trump family holdings. That's not the use of a pardon to correct an injustice. That's the use of a pardon to commit an injustice. That's corruption of the most blatant kind. And it's illustrative of the same message Donald Trump continues to send donors and friends. If you've got enough money or the right political connections, the law simply doesn't apply to you. The president isn't using the power of his office to ensure hungry families have access to food next month. He's not using the power of his office to make sure that Americans can afford to pay for their health care. He's using the power of his office to pardon a convicted billionaire and one who just happens to be doing business with the Trump family crypto platform, World Liberty Financial. We have seen this story before, and this is just the latest example of the president's abuse of the pardon power as a means of rewarding wealthy donors, family members, allies, and benefiting himself personally. We saw it when Trump pardoned corporate executives convicted of bribery and campaign finance crimes as a thank you for donating millions to his campaign. We saw it in his first term when he pardoned operatives like Roger Stone, Paul Manafort, and Steve Bannon, who helped him or his allies evade accountability. And we saw it when he issued sweeping unconditional pardons for 1,500 individuals involved in the January 6th attack on this Capitol, including many who were convicted of violent crimes, violent acts against law enforcement. In fact, the president even stacked the office's task with reviewing pardon applications with his allies, installing Ed Martin as pardon attorney at the Justice Department after his failed nomination to be U.S. Attorney for D.C. In case after case after case, the message has been clear. Loyalty to Donald Trump is more important than the rule of law. It is more important than anything in the public interest. This is not what the framers intended when they gave the president the authority to grant clemency. And they certainly never envisioned it as a get-out-of-jail-free card for political allies, campaign donors, and business partners. But this administration has turned the pardon power into a tool for corruption and self-dealing, which is why Senator Warren and I have introduced this resolution to shine a light on the rampant corruption of this administration and to hold those responsible accountable. I urge my colleagues to join us in sending a clear, bipartisan message that the U.S. government should act in the public interest, not the financial interest of the president, and that the pardon power must not be for sale. And with that, Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the Committee on Judiciary be discharged from further consideration, and the Senate now proceed to S-Res 466. Further, I ask unanimous consent that the resolution be agreed to, the preamble be agreed to, and that the motions to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate.
Is there an objection?
Mr. President.
The senator from Wyoming.
Reserving the right to object. Article 2, Section 2, Clause 1 of the United States Constitution gives the president complete discretion to issue executive clemency. In Ex parte Garland in 1866, the Supreme Court even said that the president has, quote, unlimited powers in respect to pardons, extending to every offense under the law, unquote. Congress must be mindful of its proper role as part of our constitutional separation of powers, and for those constitutional reasons alone, I cannot support this resolution. With respect to Binance in particular, and the individual who was the subject of this pardon specifically, I continue to have concerns with their past activity that may have facilitated illicit finance. In October 2023, House Financial Services Committee Chairman French Hill and I wrote a letter to the Department of Justice urging that prosecutors take a close look at whether Binance was willfully blind to bad actors using their digital asset exchange for illicit purposes, and whether Binance may have facilitated fundraising related to the October 7th attacks on Israel. I continue to stand by my letter today. This is why I'm working day and night on bipartisan digital asset market structure legislation, which will ensure that common sense illicit finance rules apply to digital asset exchanges, and that bad actors that use digital assets are rooted out. There is a renewed sense of optimism and energy around market structure talks today, and I am hopeful that we will have legislation on the Senate floor before the end of this year. And I want to make one final note, Mr. President. The hypocrisy that is patently obvious here. Where was the outrage from my colleagues when President Biden brazenly pardoned his own son for crimes he absolutely committed? And don't forget, President Biden repeatedly told the American people before an election that he would not use his constitutional pardon power to pardon his son. That hypocrisy is staggering. The American people delivered a decisive mandate for President Trump, and that includes his constitutional authority to issue pardons. Democrats need to accept the election results and stop their partisan theatrics every time this president exercises his legitimate powers. For these reasons, Mr. President, I object.
The objection is heard.
President,
The senator from Massachusetts.
Mr. President, I noticed that the senator rightly points out that the president has the power to pardon. There is nothing in our proposed resolution that tries to take that away from the president. We understand that. But we do think it's time for Congress to use its voice, for this United States Senate to stand up and say pardoning a convicted criminal who has facilitated child trafficking, who has facilitated drug trafficking, who has facilitated terrorism around the world is a really bad idea. And that's what this resolution is all about. So I understand that the senator has concerns, but those concerns could be registered by the Republicans by simply signing on to a resolution that says we do not believe it is right to pardon someone under these circumstances. I'm glad to hear that the senator is working on a market structure bill that will presumably avert this kind of problem and deal with the corruption of the Trump family as it relates to cryptocurrency. So I look forward to seeing that and just can't wait to see what the provisions are that stop Donald Trump from this kind of self-dealing and from what appears to be bribery right out in the open for the entire world to see. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
The senator from California.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just want to join in raising a few points in response to our colleague. First, the pardon power is not absolute. If the pardon power were absolute, a president could order vast branches of the U.S. government to break infinite number of laws, and then simply pardon all of the offenders. The Constitution is not interpreted as a matter of constitutional law so as to negate whole other sections of the Constitution. If it were absolute, it would negate whole other sections of the Constitution. It is not absolute. But we are not contesting whether the president has the power to grant this particular pardon. What we are contesting is the morality of doing it. What we are contesting is whether we should sit blindly while the pardon is used in such a corrupt fashion to reward friends and allies and to enrich the president's family. The fact that he may have the power to do it doesn't make it right to do, and the fact that he may have the power to do it doesn't prevent us from condemning it. And by the way, vis-a-vis President Biden, I did condemn the use of his pardon, but that certainly does not justify the use of the pardon here. It simply cannot be, should not be the case that a president gives a pardon to a convicted criminal who has helped launder money to avoid sanctions on our adversaries, and that we simply shrug and say, he has the power to do it, and we shall not condemn it. We should condemn it. And the absence of condemnation, I think, will only be an encouragement for the president to continue abusing the pardon power. I urge support for the resolution, and I thank the senator from Massachusetts for offering it. And I yield back.
Mr. President,
The senator from Wyoming.
I renew my objection as someone who was spied on by the Biden Justice Department, one of 8 senators to be spied on, in violation of the separation of powers. I respect the separation of powers. And in this case, the separation of powers protects the President of the United States' pardon power. We need to protect it as well. For those reasons, I further object, Mr. President. Thank you.
The senator from Virginia.
Mr. President, I ask permission to display on my colleague's desk my office supply of ground coffee.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I rise to speak about a vote that we will cast in a few hours with respect to President Trump's imposition of a 50% tariff on all goods coming from Brazil. President Trump's tariff regime, global tariffs, Brazilian tariffs, Canadian tariffs, tariff deals announced, then paused, tariff deals negotiated, exceptions granted, and in some cases not granted, have created huge chaos in the national economy. 3 universities looked at the Virginia economy in the last month, and a summary of those 3 universities' reports was published in a Virginia publication last week titled, "Virginia's GDP Growth Drops from 6.2% to 1.7%. And the analysis of this precipitous decline, 75% decline nearly, in the Virginia GDP in the first year of Donald Trump's presidency, cited a number of factors. Mass layoffs of federal employees and contractors, cancellation of highly valued economic development projects, clawback of research funding and other programmatic funding, but importantly, a key component affecting the Virginia economy and the national economy right now is the president's chaotic tariff regime. Tariffs are a tax on American consumers. Tariffs are a tax on American businesses, and they are a tax that is imposed by a single person, Donald J. Trump. In Virginia, we are seeing, and nationally, we are seeing the effects of the Trump economy, and it was well summarized in one of the reports I referenced. Fewer jobs, jobs declining, higher prices, whether it's food, building supplies, energy, healthcare, higher prices, and slower growth. I want to talk about one aspect of this economic malpractice the imposition of tariffs, and in particular, the imposition of tariffs on Brazil. The president has imposed a tariff on Brazil of 50% on all the products that the United States imports from Brazil. I want to get to Brazil and the tariffs and the effect it's having on American consumers in a minute, but first, what is the power that the president cites enabling him to put such a sizable tariff on Brazilian products? What he cites is a statute called IEEPA, dealing with international economic emergencies, and that is a statute that passed by Congress, signed into law decades ago, allowing the president under some circumstances to take actions following the declaration of an international emergency. What is an international emergency? The IEEPA statute, 50 U.S.C. section 1701, says that the emergency that a president must declare is any unusual and extraordinary threat which has its source in whole or substantial part outside the United States, the threat being to the national security, foreign policy, or economy of the United States if the president declares a national emergency with respect to such threat. So the 50% tariff on all products from Brazil is justified by President Trump declaring that Brazil represents a national security threat. Mr. President, the 50% tariff was imposed in two actions. The president imposed global tariffs on most nations in the world in April and imposed a 10% tariff on Brazil in that action, but then added an additional 40% in a ruling from the White House at the end of July, combining to be a 50% tariff. Now, Mr. President, you have followed President Trump's logic on tariffs. The global tariffs that were imposed because he claims that other nations are ripping America off in trade. Other nations are ripping America off in trade. They are selling us more of their stuff and not buying enough of our stuff. And the president says that's a ripoff. I disagree with him on whether or not that's a ripoff, but you would have a hard time making a case that Brazil is ripping off the United States in trade. We have a trade surplus with Brazil. Many of the other nations that the president has imposed tariffs on, there is a trade deficit as measured by goods. The president usually doesn't look at the deficit in goods and services. If you look at both, the picture actually looks much better for the United States. But Brazil, we have a trade surplus with Brazil of nearly $7 billion in goods and nearly $23 billion in services annually. Last year, the trade surplus we had with Brazil was $30 billion. They buy $30 billion more of our stuff than we buy of their stuff. So that makes Brazil a very unusual subject or target of a tariff regime designed to stop other nations from ripping us off. So if that's not the emergency, if we're in trade surplus with Brazil, if that's not the emergency, why is the president declaring that there's an emergency with Brazil that warrants taxing American consumers by raising the price of any goods brought in from Brazil by 50%? This has got to be, Mr. President, the most unusual use of IEEPA in American history. It is the most extreme and illogical declaration of an emergency in American history. And that's saying a lot, Mr. President, because President Trump declared an energy emergency on day one of his tenure, even though America was producing more energy than any time in the history of the United States. Oil, gas, wind, solar, battery storage. We are the leaders in the world in energy production, but President Trump declared an energy emergency so he could give an easy pass lane around environmental regulations to oil, gas, and coal projects. So I thought that emergency declaration was pretty extreme. But I got a more extreme one. President Trump is unhappy that Brazil is prosecuting a friend of his. The former president of Brazil, on his way out the door, inspired a lot of people to try to protest and even overturn the peaceful transfer of power when he lost an election. And so Brazil is prosecuting him under Brazilian laws. When the president heard that former President Bolsonaro was being prosecuted, he threatened 50% tariffs if you don't stop the Bolsonaro witch hunt trial. How is that trial an emergency for the United States? How is that trial a threat to American national security or our economy? The president's mad that a friend of his is being prosecuted. How is that an emergency? We went on. As the trial got underway in the middle of July, Fox News, Trump calls for immediate end to unjust trial of former Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro. Unjust trial. I don't think President Trump is a lawyer, and I know he's not a Brazilian lawyer. I doubt he has an expertise in Brazilian law. By what right would he call that trial unjust? By what right would he claim that the trial of this president for trying to inspire the overturn of power, by what right would he claim that that's an emergency for the United States? President Trump wasn't done by making these demands and threatening tariffs. He had his administration take another step, highly unusual. U.S. sanctions Brazilian judge for prosecuting Trump ally Bolsonaro. It's the end of July. I'm threatening tariffs. I'm claiming that the prosecution is unjust. The United States even used sanctions power that Donald Trump has the unilateral ability to use to sanction the judge presiding over the case. Go back to the definition that I read you earlier. How is a prosecution of a potential Brazilian lawbreaker an unusual or extraordinary threat to the national security, foreign policy, or economy of the United States? I would assert, Mr. President, if we allow President Trump to declare this prosecution an emergency, we will have given any president a completely blank check to invent an emergency and do whatever they want and bypass Congress for doing so. This is not an emergency, and that's why I have filed with other senators a resolution to terminate President Trump's emergency. But this isn't just about a misuse of executive power. It has real-life consequences. Let me just bring up one that I have to admit I'm really biased about, which is coffee. Like a lot of people in this chamber, I drink too much coffee. Americans drink just about more coffee per capita than any country in the world, and coffee imports are the most significant agricultural import we bring into the United States. I lived in a great coffee-producing country when I was a missionary, Honduras. They produce a lot of coffee. The U.S. doesn't produce so much. I think the president knows that in the United States, the only places where coffee is grown are Hawaii and Puerto Rico. Nowhere else in the United States are there conditions that allow for the growth of coffee. Sometimes we put tariffs on products coming in from other nations to grow and inspire a domestic industry. If we make, Brazilian steel more expensive, maybe we'll make more steel in the United States. I'm here to tell you that there's no amount of tariff that would turn the United States into a nation that could produce a lot of coffee. And if every bit of coffee that could be produced in Puerto Rico and Hawaii were produced, it would meet precisely 1% of the coffee that Americans drink. So we bring in coffee. And our single largest source of coffee is Brazil. 35% of American coffee comes from Brazil. The next source, Colombia, 27%. And then other nations, Vietnam produces a good bit of coffee. Other nations in Central America produce a good bit of coffee. But the real powerhouse And I can be sure that in my office's supply of ground coffee that we use to make coffee every morning, there's a lot of Brazilian coffee in there. The real powerhouse is Brazil. After the president announced that he was going to do these tariffs, the news started up right away. The prediction, U.S. coffee drinkers and businesses will pay the price of Trump's Brazil tariff. Sometimes the president likes to say other nations pay them. No, this is a sales tax directly on those who consume the product. And that was the prediction, and the prediction turned out to be true. The tariffs went into effect at the end of July. By September 12, 6 weeks later, CNN Business, coffee prices haven't surged this much in decades. Haven't surged this much in decades. And the surging is very, very noticeable. By the end of July, coffee prices keep surging, and it's likely to get worse. By the end of July, and remember, the end of July, there was only the 10% tariff that had been imposed on Brazil in April. The extra 40% didn't kick in until the end of July. But coffee had already surged 14% at the end of July from July a year before. But I don't have the chart to show you today. The statistics just came out about September. The price of coffee, a staple in virtually every American household, has increased by 40% between September 2024 and September 2025. And every American experiences it at the grocery store when they're buying coffee, and every American experiences it when they're in coffee shops purchasing coffee. I held a roundtable with small businesses in Northern Virginia 2 Fridays ago at a tea shop out near Reston called Eldon Street Tea Shop. And I had tea shops. They're getting hit by tariffs because tea comes from nations like India and China and Vietnam. And I had coffee shops and I had chocolate shops. All of these are products that are being imported, and they're all being dramatically affected. And these small businesses said, if you have a chance, Senator, please do something. Please do something to stop this tariff madness. And so that's why I'm on the floor today. I've used coffee as an example because I didn't want to bring a side of beef in and put it on the desk. We get a lot of beef from Brazil. 50% tariffs have dramatically driven up the price of ground beef in supermarkets all over this country. People are paying more for coffee. They're paying more for beef. They're paying more for fruits and vegetables that come from nations that have been socked by Trump tariffs. People are paying more for building supplies. People are paying more for energy. People are paying more for health care. That's why the economist who looked at the Virginia economy said the Trump economy is one of higher prices, fewer jobs, and slower growth. It is my hope, Mr. President, that my colleagues will stand up for their constituents and say enough is enough. No president, Democrat or Republican, should be able to declare a national emergency justifying the imposition of 50% tariffs because a friend of theirs is being prosecuted for breaking the law in another country. If this body allows that, this body will be opening the door for untold mischief committed by future presidents who will decide, I can declare anything an emergency. And the Senate will just lay down and let me walk over them and not speak out against it. And it also is important for us to acknowledge this isn't just about an abuse of presidential power. It's about abuse of presidential power that people are feeling every time they walk down a grocery store aisle to buy coffee for their families, to buy ground beef for their families. I hope my colleagues will join me in an effort to reverse the declaration of a national emergency and save everyday people and businesses some money. With that, Mr. President, I thank you and I yield the floor.
President. Senator from Washington.
Mr. President, thank you. You know, President Trump has single-handedly raised taxes more than any president in my lifetime. He has, without any consultation or approval from Congress, imposed billions of dollars in new tariffs. These are taxes, They're paid for by the American people. They hurt small business owners who need raw materials that just aren't available here in the United States. They cut off crucial export markets for our farmers when other nations inevitably retaliate. And they are sending prices soaring across the board from big things like cars to everyday essentials like groceries. Trump's tariffs have already raised retail prices for families by 5%. 5%. And this year alone, his tariffs are expected to cost American households an average of $1,800. That is staggering. Still, nearly every single Senate Republican has refused to vote with us to end this chaos. I will say it another way. Republicans are refusing to stop President Trump from raising taxes on working families. Now, we all saw Republicans move heaven and earth this year to shovel more tax breaks at billionaires. But you know, when it comes to taxes on working families, well, they're downright eager to force families to pay more every time they go to the supermarket. I'm not going to let this get swept under the rug, especially not when Trump shows us every day that his tariffs are not about any sort of economic strategy or any real emergency. Trump's tariff policy is as strategic as a toddler who plays with a light switch. Last week we saw Trump raise taxes on Americans. Why? Because he was mad that Canada ran an ad quoting Ronald Reagan. That's about as ridiculous as it gets. My state shares a border with Canada. There are countless families and businesses that span our northern border. People who have built businesses that rely on strong trade relationships, from farmers who send their crops north, to shops that bring in products, to towns that serve tourists and visitors that come down from our neighbors. And these Washington business owners are all having their livelihoods completely turned upside down on a whim by President Trump. And again, let's be clear, all Canada did to unleash more blind fury and boneheaded tariffs from President Trump was quote President Ronald Reagan. Now, for all the policies I disagree with, Reagan at least had enough sense to understand that we, the American people, are the ones who pay those tariffs. For my colleagues, these are the words that Donald Trump does not want you to hear. This is what Reagan had to say about tariffs verbatim. Quote, "Over the long run, such trade barriers hurt every American worker and consumer." And quote, "Then the worst happens. Markets shrink and collapse. Businesses and industries shut down. Millions of people lose their jobs." But you know what? If Republicans don't want to listen to Reagan this time, well then, how about they start listening to American families and farmers and small businesses back in their own home states? Because as someone who has had countless discussions about tariffs with the people that I represent back home, I have no doubt Republicans' own constituents will tell them firsthand just how painful Trump's trade war has been for them. I have heard from businesses across my home state of Washington who are getting crushed by Trump's tariffs. An Asian grocery store that sells goods you simply have to source from abroad, green tea. Coffee shops that are getting hit, as senators talked about, since most of our country can't grow coffee beans. Clothing stores that tell me they are struggling with higher prices for cotton canvas or zippers or threads or buckles. And then there are farmers across my state and really across the country that are getting boxed out of key markets by these trade wars Trump is starting left and right for no reason. And there are the jobs at our ports that are threatened as every new chaotic tariff Trump decides to tweet out whittles away at imports and exports alike, and it grinds our really busy, bustling ports to an absolute standstill, and that puts thousands of jobs in jeopardy. Foreign imports are now down by a third at the Port of Seattle and Tacoma, a third. The reality of Trump's tariffs is painfully obvious to families and business owners who are bearing the brunt of this ham-fisted trade war. You can't just make it in America when the it in question is fruits and vegetables we can't grow at scale here in the United States. You can't just make it in America when even making something here requires parts and raw materials from across the globe. There are just higher prices for working families, tighter margins for our struggling businesses, and even more worry for our families and our businesses who are being pushed to the edge. Families are feeling those price hikes every single day. Small businesses in my state and across the country are facing very difficult decisions right now and trying to decide whether they can even keep their doors open right now. People across America, across party lines, across economic backgrounds, and across nearly every divide imaginable are now speaking out. The time has come now for Republicans to actually listen. The time has come to hold President Trump accountable for raising prices on families across the board. The time has come to end President Trump's new taxes on everything. And the time has come for Congress, us, to start asserting our authority on tariffs instead of ceding every single part of our jobs to a president who is joking he is the Speaker of the House. Is he going to start calling himself the Majority Leader too? Mr. President, I urge all of my colleagues to join me in voting for this resolution so we can start rolling back Trump's taxes on Americans and take some pressure off our families and small businesses in the states that we are all here to represent. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
President.
Senator from Oregon.
Mr. President, I rise to support my colleagues, Senator Kaine and Senator Paul, on their joint resolution to terminate Donald Trump's order placing blanket tariffs on products Americans buy from Brazil. I'm going to start with the impact on Americans. Donald Trump's unilateral tariff spree is an unprecedented tax on American families who are already struggling. The tariffs on Brazil are no different. We get lots of coffee from Brazil, and coffee prices are up 21% from a year ago. Ground beef is up 13% from last year. That's according to Fox News. And Brazil is a major supplier. But instead of getting rid of these tariffs, Donald Trump is sending $40 billion to subsidize ranchers in Argentina. Now, I recently held town hall meetings at home, and surprisingly, not a single Oregonian told me they wanted to pay more for their morning coffee or more for a hamburger. In all, Donald Trump's tariffs are going to cost the average American family more than $2,000 this year, according to the Yale Budget Lab. That, Mr. President, is the what? Higher prices on coffee, beef, and building materials Americans get from Brazil. Now I'm going to talk about why. Donald Trump didn't unilaterally slap those 40% tariffs on things we buy from Brazil to help the American worker. No, America had a $7 billion trade surplus with Brazil last year. And while food prices in the U.S. are shooting up, Trump's tariffs have lowered food prices in Mexico and Brazil. The real reason, and this is what's crucial, the real reason Donald Trump is imposing these tariffs, by his own words, is to settle personal scores and pressure the Brazilian government to let their corrupt former president off the hook. In his letter announcing the tariffs, Donald Trump called the prosecution of former President Bolsonaro a witch hunt. Colleagues, Mr. Bolsonaro was convicted of masterminding a failed coup. There is no way that taking money out of Americans' wallets to protect one corrupt politician in South America makes even a bit of sense. This is a brazenly illegal and corrupt effort by Donald Trump that, in my view, is directly hurting the American people. I strongly urge my colleagues to vote yes on the Kaine-Paul resolution to end the Brazil tariffs. This body is going to vote on more of these resolutions in coming weeks. I see my friend from Kentucky here who's joining me in a crucial one of those. My legislation with Senator Paul would repeal all of Donald Trump's global tariffs. I'm committed, Mr. President, to seizing back Congress's constitutional role over trade, which is spelled out in the Constitution. It's my hope that colleagues on both sides of the aisle will exercise their best judgment on these crucial, key tariff issues. Listen to constituents and vote for Americans instead of for Donald Trump and corrupt foreign strongmen. I yield and look forward to hearing my colleagues talk further today on this issue.
Mr. President.
Senator from Kentucky.
Taxation without representation is tyranny. This was the rallying cry of our founding fathers. This was the rallying cry of American patriots in the years leading up to the American Revolution. It was the rallying cry of militiamen at the battles of Lexington and Concord, and it still should be the rallying cry of Congress. No taxation without representation is embedded in our Constitution. The Constitution forbids any one man or woman from raising taxes. Revenue is not only a question for Congress, but the Constitution commands that taxation legislation originate in the House of Representatives. This is the only issue that specifically has to originate not only in Congress, but in one specific house. Our founders thought that the House of Representatives, elected every 2 years, were closer to the people. And the things they feared the most were big taxes and big government. They said taxes must originate in the House. And yet these taxes are originating with the White House. The idea that no one should have taxes imposed on them without their consent is central to the ancient concept of what constitutes a free people. That principle is enshrined in Magna Carta. That taxation should be imposed only after obtaining the common counsel of the kingdom. It was reaffirmed in the 1689 English Bill of Rights, when it declared that there shall be no taxation without the consent of Parliament. In 1765, the American patriot who helped formulate the grievances against the British Crown, James Otis, called for a defense of this principle by popularizing the phrase, "Taxation without representation is tyranny." This principle was said by many to be the principle, the spark that sparked our revolution. Yet today the Senate is compelled to act because one person in our country wishes to raise taxes. Without the approval of the Senate, without the approval of the House, without the approval of the Constitution. The idea that one person can raise taxes is contrary to our founding principles. The Constitution forbids it. As Montesquieu wrote, in the spirit of the laws, when the legislative and the executive are combined and united in one person, there can be no liberty. Our founders took that heart to lesson and embedded that in the Constitution, the principle of the separation of powers, as well as a system of checks and balances. They knew that combining the legislative and executive powers would lead the country down a path to tyranny. Allowing taxes to be levied, doubled, tripled, and then one day perhaps forgiven is a recipe for chaos. The tariffs are implemented, the tariffs are canceled, the tariffs are delayed, the tariff rate changes daily. Just this week, the president added a special 10% import tax on Canada because he was mad about the nation's Ronald Reagan ad. An ad, by the way, which was showing Ronald Reagan verbatim speaking. Newsflash to the administration, Reagan was a free trader. Reagan believed, and I quote, that protectionism costs consumers billions of dollars, damages the overall economy, and destroys jobs. Ronald Reagan's vision for America can be seen in our trading relationship with Canada. In 1986, President Reagan said, "Our trade policy rests firmly on the foundation of free and open markets." Further, he said, "I recognize the inescapable conclusion that all history has taught. The freer the flow of trade, the stronger the tides of human progress and peace among nations." It was Bastiat who wrote that when trade and when goods don't cross borders, armies will. It's not a guarantee of peace, but one way to achieve peace is to attempt to have good relations and trade with all nations. No country, no business, no family can plan a budget when the tax rates, the import tax rates, and the cost of every commodity are determined by the whims of one man. There are now tariffs on steel, there are tariffs on aluminum, there are tariffs on lumber, and they change from day to day. But not one of these tariffs was voted on by the people's elected representative in Congress. These tariffs are simply announced by presidential proclamation. So perhaps more fundamental than a debate over what these tariffs are, what the rates are, and what they do to our economy is the question of whether Americans ought to perpetually live under emergency rule. This administration has declared emergencies with over 100 nations. With these emergency declarations, the president claims the unilateral right to levy import taxes. Think about this. What do you think of when you think of an emergency? You think of a war, a tornado, a famine. You don't think of trade policy that all of a sudden we have to give up on all of our constitutional prerogatives, all of the separation of powers, all that is embedded in the Constitution because there's an emergency in trade policy. If that were true, imagine what emergencies might come forward. Imagine where we would be and what lack of restraint would happen. And for Republicans, imagine what it's going to be like when someone from the other party is elected and they declare an emergency over the climate and ban cars or whatever might happen. We shouldn't be living this way. People say Congress is messy, Congress goes to gridlock. It's called debate, it's called discussion, and the only way we typically get somewhere is we have to agree with some people on the other side. That's one of the things we're trying to overcome now. But our founding fathers anticipated that a president might attempt someday to usurp the powers, the constitutional powers of the legislature. Madison wrote that our constitutional government would pit ambition against ambition. The ambition of a president or ambition of the Congress to usurp power will be checked by the other guarding their power. That we would limit the power of any one branch through checks and balances and prevent abuses of power. Madison, if he were here today, would be aghast to witness today's Congress that seems to lack any ambition to defend the constitutional separation of power. Emergency rule rejects the premise of a constitutional republic with limited powers and full accountability. Emergency rule is ruled by one person. We will perpetuate emergency rule that provides the president extraordinary powers to tax us without our consent. Is that what we're going to allow? Or will we restore constitutional government in which taxes are debated and voted on by the people's representatives? I, for one, still believe in the principle of no taxation without representation, and will vote to terminate this contrived emergency and end these unconstitutional import taxes.
Mr. President.
Senator from Oregon.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the following members of my team be granted floor privileges for the remainder of the Congress: Christopher Steele, Madeline Villa, Meredith Shea, Eric Gitson, Matthew Trone, Ethan Lucas, Christopher Adair, Carl Levy, Stephen Kasparek, and Rami Major.
Without objection.
I yield the floor.
Senator from Colorado.
Thank you. The U.S. is stuck in the painful throes of one of the worst, longest government shutdowns in our history. Americans are calling out for leaders in the White House and Congress who will cut through the chaos and begin to restore order. Last week, our president played his trump card. In the middle of this shutdown, with health care for 35 million Americans online, or on the line, the president gave a green light to a $40 billion bailout. A $40 billion bailout, I had to read that twice, to Argentina. Yeah, you heard me right. President Trump decided to prop up the far-right agenda in Argentina right before their elections and leave Americans nervous that they're going to be able to afford their health care. Doesn't make a lot of sense. The real gut punch, he did it right as 20 million Americans are bracing for their health care costs to, in many cases, double or more when the ACA premium tax credits expire. Now, think about that for just a moment. Instead of spending $40 billion to lower health care costs for 20 million Americans, President Trump decided that the $40 billion should go to Argentina. That's certainly not America first. Instead of spending $40 billion to make sure that seniors can afford their insulin, cancer patients can continue their chemo, sick kids can see a doctor, President Trump is sending $40 billion to Argentina. $20 billion of that bailout is backed by all of you, the American taxpayer. Trump promised to lower costs for working families, but food prices are up. Electric bills are up, and now healthcare prices are going to be exploding. It's all because of what the MAGA Republicans and the president are doing. Here's the reality. In July, Republicans passed their budget bill that's going to strip roughly $1 trillion out of Medicaid and the Affordable Care Act. It's the largest cut to health care in the history of this country, the largest cut to health care in American history. It's exploding our national debt by trillions, and it gives pretty lavish tax breaks to some of our largest corporations and some of our wealthiest individuals. As if working families needed another hit, 20 million Americans are going to see their health care premiums double when ACA tax credits expire at the start of the year. On this Saturday, every single American can log online and see the new cost of their premium if they're on the exchange. In Colorado, the Denver Post reported today that premiums will double. And for far too many, this is going to be financially devastating. We're trying to get our arms around the increase that we're going to see in medical bankruptcies. In Colorado, a family of four making a combined $128,000 is going to have to pay $14,000 more for their health care. So they're making $128,000. At the end of the month, they're still trying to make sure they balance the household budget. And now they're going to have to spend $14,000 more just on health care. If that family lives on the west slope in Colorado, west of the Rocky Mountain Divide, or whether it's out on the Eastern Plains, they'll pay even more, somewhere between $16,000 and $21,000 in additional premiums. Nobody has that kind of money. I'm not sure why the president doesn't understand that. Small businesses, some with very tight margins already, are going to be forced to choose between insurance or layoffs. Roughly 225,000 Coloradans are in that group that are going to see their premiums double. Double. It's so much more expensive that an estimated 4 million Americans will be priced out of their health care next year, including roughly 75,000 Coloradans. And for those people with pre-existing conditions, boy, that's taking a dangerous hit. And if you think you're safe because you receive insurance through your employer, think again. People are going to continue to get sick regardless of whether or not they have health care. The fact is, of course, that more Americans get sick when they can't afford basic preventative care. That's why they call it preventative care. Here's a startling fact that came out of a Harvard study in 2009. Americans without health insurance on any given year have a 40% higher risk of death than those with insurance in that same given year. I'm going to repeat that. Americans without health insurance have a 40% higher possibility of dying than those with insurance in any given year. The result? When there are fewer insured Americans in the entire system, insurance companies raise premiums on those who do have insurance to make up the shortfall. That means we're all in the same leaky ship. A little over a week ago, I spoke with one of the many Americans who will be impacted, a young woman named Mercedes, who lives in Commerce City, Colorado. Now, Mercedes and her family, U.S. citizens, live in a district represented by Congressman Gabe Evans, who's been a vocal advocate of Trump's budget bill, the same budget bill that's going to cut $1 trillion from Medicaid and the Affordable Care Act. In Representative Evans' district, 1 in 4 Coloradans are on Medicaid, including 86,000 children. 86,000 children, 1 in 4 people on Medicaid. Just over 7 weeks ago, Mercedes' family of 3 became a family of 4. She gave birth, earlier than expected, to a baby girl. Her newborn spent 49 days in the intensive care unit, the NICU, before they were finally able to bring her home last Friday. Doctors diagnosed their baby with a rare disorder that's going to require some level of specialized care for life. Even now at home, their baby still depends on a home health nurse and a feeding tube. So when Mercedes recently opened a letter informing her that her insurance premiums are going to skyrocket once the ACA tax credits expire, it wasn't a function of being frustrated. For her, it was terrifying. Mercedes' premium is already more than $1,000 a month, and it's about to jump even higher. In addition to running their business, caring for their newborn with a fragile health condition, and raising their 7-year-old daughter, Mercedes and her husband now have to worry about their ability to be able to afford health care, to be able to stay on the health care that they have. They have a baby who is fully dependent on expensive hospital care. If their premiums go up, how are they going to afford the NICU bills? What will they have to sacrifice? Will the food take a cut? Will their rent go into arrears? Will they afford their medications? Mercedes doesn't have to go through this. No American should have to go through this. And Mercedes isn't alone. There are 20 million Americans bracing for these types of cuts. 20 million more people, just like Mercedes, who depend on their health care to afford their prescriptions, to keep a roof over their heads, and importantly, to stay out of the hospital. It doesn't have to be this way. All that the president and the MAGA Republicans have to do is extend the health care tax credits. If they can find $40 billion to send to Argentina, they can almost assuredly find $40 billion to begin to stop premiums from doubling for Mercedes and 20 million Americans. I think we've lost our bearings. We've lost our North Star in this. Healthcare isn't political. It impacts every single one of us, Republican or Democrat, urban or rural, and it often interrupts our lives when we least expect it, especially when we're most unable to afford it. And this problem is easy to solve. Republicans and Democrats can reopen the government today and fix this healthcare crisis. We need to start talking together and have a discussion, but we can work together and reopen the government. Working families want us to take leadership on this. They want us to get back to the issues that they sent us to Congress to solve, to make life better for them and their community, and for us to hold down the costs that are making their lives more difficult. I think we need to listen to Americans. I don't think it's too late, but it's long overdue. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield back the floor.
Senator from Louisiana.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent to display 3 charts during my remarks.
Without objection.
Mr. President, with me today is Mr. James Shea, one of my colleagues from my Senate office. I want to talk today, Mr. President, about the owls. There are 19 species or kinds of owls in the United States. Did you know that? 19. I want to talk about 2 of them. The spotted owl and the barred owl. That's barred, B-A-R-R-E-D. Both of them are God's creatures. I also want to talk today, Mr. President, and you'll understand what I mean in a moment, about the federal government's proclivity, repeated proclivity, to do the dumbest thing possible that won't work. Now, the federal government, which can't even deliver the mail when it has the address right there on the front, and more specifically, the Department of Interior, has promulgated a rule. And this rule says that unless Congress stops them, they're going to hire hunters right here to kill 453,000 barred owls. There are only 4 million in the United States, but the Department of Interior wants to kill 453,000 mama barred owls, daddy barred owls, and baby barred owls, because the Department of Interior says that the barred owl is a better hunter than the spotted owl. The Department of Interior is not saying the barred owl is eating the spotted owl. The Department of Interior isn't saying that the barred owl is hurting the spotted owl. The Department of Interior says it wants to kill over 10% of the barred owl population because the barred owl is a better hunter than the spotted owl, and they want to tip the scales of nature in favor of the spotted owl, even though the spotted owl is not on the endangered species list. My resolution, which will be voted on tomorrow, will stop this nonsense. First, I want to talk a little bit more about the barred owl, and in doing so, I'll talk a little bit about its cousin, the spotted owl. As I said, they're both God's creatures. This is a barred owl. It's beautiful. If you've ever seen a barred owl, it has very, very soulful eyes. Their feathers are incredibly soft. It's called a barred, B-A-R-R-E-D, because of the bars that run across here, as opposed to a spotted owl. The barred owl, 10% of which our brainiacs at the Department of Interior want to kill, has been around for 11,000 years. Sometimes the barred owl is called a hoot owl. That may be the term you know it by best. The barred owl is about 2 feet long. It's got incredible eyes. Man, it can see. It's like Superman or Superwoman. It's got incredible eyes and incredible hearing. The barred owl, like the spotted owl, it's nocturnal. They come out at night. They hide during the day, and they come out at night. And the barred owl is a great hunter, great hunter. The barred owl eats mice. The barred owl eats squirrels. The barred owl eats snakes. The barred owl eats lizards. The barred owl eats spiders. Barred owl even eats bats. The barred owl lives, as does the spotted owl for that matter, in old growth forests. In fact, I have a pair of barred owls that live in the forest behind my house. They're great. They always come in pairs, about which I'll talk in a second. In fact, you can attract barred owls. Many people do, by building what's called a nest box. And you can have barred owls come and live if you live near a forest. If you want to know how, if you're not handy like me and you want to know how to build a nest box, just go to YouTube. Barred owls marry for life. They mate for life. And when a male barred owl is courting a female barred owl, I've seen videos, it's really cool. The male barred owl courts a female by bowing. The male barred owl bows, and it opens its wings up a little bit. Doesn't want to be intimidating to the female, not full blast, but it opens its legs up a little bit. And the barred owl wobbles its head back and forth, side to side. And if the female is impressed, The female says, I do. And they stay married the rest of their lives together. That's why you see them in pairs. They have babies once a year, generally 2 to 5 babies. Well, I can't go there. These are two of the babies that the Department of Interior wants to kill. They're going to pay the same price, by the way, to the hunter to kill the babies as they are to kill the mama. They don't care. They just want to kill them all. When the babies are little bitty when they're born, they're not covered in feathers. Little babies are covered in soft white down. They don't start getting feathers until about 2 weeks. And the mama barred owl stays with the babies for the first few weeks. Sometimes the babies, like senators, fall out of the nest as they start exploring around, and the mama or the daddy barred owl, unless the daddy's out hunting for food, has to get them back into the nest. The babies learn to fly after about 10 weeks. Now, what does this have to do with the spotted owl, which is also one of God's creatures? The barred owl is native. It's originally from the eastern United States and southeastern Canada. It's existed there 11,000 years. But over the past 100 years, 100 years is just the blink of an eye in time. Over the past 100 years, the Northeast has gotten more and more crowded. And the old growth forests that the barred owl lives in have been cut down and subdivisions built. So the barred owl, as happens all the time in nature, has started moving west. And it's moving west, and it's moving west. And now the barred owl is entering Washington State, Oregon, Northern California, and British Columbia in Canada. Well, that's where the spotted owl lives. The spotted owl also lives in old growth forest, but not exactly in the old growth forest in the west is the same place as the barred owl is. The spotted owl prefers an old growth forest at a higher elevation. The barred owl is a better hunter. It's slightly bigger than a spotted owl. The barred owl is a better hunter than the spotted owl. Now, let me say it again, because there's been a lot of confusion about this. The barred owl doesn't hunt the spotted owl. In fact, many times a barred owl and a spotted owl will get married. I know they're cousins, but that doesn't matter. They're distant cousins, and sometimes they get married, and they interbreed. So this isn't a question of one animal killing another. The Department of Interior is mad at the barred owl because the barred owl's a better hunter. The barred owl is just a better hunter. That's just the way it is. You know, just like the Senate president is better looking than me, I accept that. That's the way God made us. God just made the barred owl a better hunter. And the Department of Interior is all up in arms. They say this is threatening the spotted owl. Now, the spotted owl isn't on the endangered species list, but they say this isn't fair. The barred owl is a better hunter than the spotted owl, and that's causing the spotted owl's population to decrease. So the Department of Interior, in its infinite wisdom, has come up with DEI for owls. They've come up with quotas for owls. The barred owl, because nature, God, whatever you believe in, made them better hunters, now has to give up its rights, has to give up its life, because the spotted owl is not as good of a hunter. Now, as I mentioned, the spotted owl and the barred owl don't always live in the same place. Out west, the spotted owl prefers higher elevations than the barred owl. But they do, it's undeniable, they compete for food and they both live in old growth forests. Let me tell you something. The Department of Interior doesn't like to admit this, Mr. President. The spotted owl population was declining even before the barred owl decided to move. You know why? It had nothing to do with food. It had nothing to do with the barred owl. It had to do with the same thing happening on the West Coast that has happened on the East Coast. Many of the old growth forests have been cut down to make way for more people. And you might have noticed we've had a few forest fires. And they have been causing the population of the spotted owl to be reduced. Not to the point of endangered. The Interior Department just says they're threatened. That's the problem with the spotted owl. It's not the barred owl. Now, this regulation that I'm trying to overturn was promulgated under President Biden's Department of Interior. Okay? But the Department of Interior, I want to make this clear, under President Trump, has embraced this rule. They think this is the greatest rule, this is the greatest idea they've ever heard of. They think it tastes like pumpkin pie to them. In fact, I got a call from Secretary Burgum, who I love and respect. He was mad as a mama wasp. Pull down that regulation. He accused me of slandering the Trump administration. I'm not slandering the Trump administration. This was a President Biden regulation. Now, I was polite with the secretary, but I told him he was confused. He needed to call somebody. He had the wrong person on the line. The secretary needed to call somebody who cared what he thought. Because I think he's wrong. I think he's wrong. I think he and the other members of the administrative state of the Department of Interior decided to play God. And they're wrong for at least 5 reasons. Number one, their plan, their brainiac plan, which looks like it was designed by a heroin addict with a socket wrench, won't work. It won't work. Now, let me tell you what they're going to do. They want to hire hunters. They want to hire Elmer here to go out at night with a flashlight and shoot the barred owls. Now, this is night, okay? The barred owl lives about 40 feet up off the ground in a tree. You know what else lives about 40 feet up off the ground in a tree? The spotted owl. You think that these cowboys who are going disco because they have a federal contract are going to be able to always tell the difference between a barred owl and a spotted owl? They're going to shoot them both and let God sort them out because they're being paid. Look, I'm a duck hunter. And a lot of times when I hunt ducks, I'm not a big hunter, but I like to duck hunt and dove hunt. I eat what I kill. But a lot of times when I'm duck hunting, there are different points for different species of duck. I can't tell which duck is which. I've passed up shots before because I thought it might be a mallard when I can't kill any more mallard. You think these cowboys that they're going to hire from the private sector, going out there with the little flashlights, old Elmer here, with his little red hat, in the middle of the night with a flashlight, are going to tell the difference or care the difference between a barred owl and a spotted owl? No. They're going to shoot them both. Number two, the other reason it won't work is the spotted owls are not stupid. Once you start shooting at them, they're going to move up into Canada. The Canadians aren't dumb enough to do something like this. They're going to move up into Canada. And they're going to wait until the shooting stops. And then they're going to come back down. So what have we accomplished? Have we done anything for the spotted owl? No. Number three, I've been through this reg stem to stern. I can't find where this regulation prohibits Elmer Fudd from going out there and using lead shot. Now, when we hunt ducks, You can't use lead shot, you use steel shot. You know why? Because a lot of times other birds and other animals will eat the lead shot and they die from it. So these cowboys are going to go out, if they're not prohibited from using lead shot, yeah, they're going to kill some barred owls and spotted owls. They're going to end up killing eagles and hawks and other wildlife using their lead shot. The second reason this won't work, let me say it again. The barred owls aren't the problem. The problem is that we're losing old growth forest in the west, which is the habitat of the spotted owl. And it's naturally occurring as more people move to Washington and Northern Carolina and Oregon, and we have wildfires that have burned our forests. Don't go pick on the barred owl. You can kill every barred owl there is, and it's not going to help the spotted owl if you don't maintain the appropriate habitat. Number three, this is going to be incredibly expensive. This comes under the theme of let's do the dumbest thing possible that won't work. Our Department of Interior has already issued one contract. I don't know how they got the authority to do it, but back in 2004, they issued a contract to a private vendor, Elmer here, to go kill 1,500 barred owls. I guess they wanted to test it out. You know what they paid? $3,000 a bird. $3,000 for a mama barred owl, $3,000 for a daddy barred owl, and $3,000 for a baby barred owl. Give me a break. And now they're going to go out and kill 453,000? Over $1 billion. Over $1 billion. It's not their money, but it's taxpayer money on a plan that won't even work. Here's what one person from the Department of Interior said. In a rare moment of candor, he might have gotten fired, but he's a wildlife and fisheries agent. He told the press, I'm going to quote, he said, I think all we can really do is try our best to provide a habitat for spotted owls, and in the long run, we're just going to have to let the two species work it out. Final reason this is a bad reg, and then I'm going to wrap this up. I know the bureaucrats at the Department of Interior, I realize this, they're smarter and they're more virtuous than you and I are. I get that. But who appointed them God? Who appointed them God? Barred owls are expanding their habitat because the forests in the east have been cut down. That's called adaptive range expansion. And you know what? Whether you believe in God or nature or whatever, that happens every single day in our ecosystem. It's a naturally occurring ecological phenomenon. It's a core behavioral characteristic of mammals. All the barred owls are doing, they're not hurting anybody, they're just doing what nature teaches them to do. We're going to change nature. We're going to control our environment to this extent. We're going to pass DEI for owls. We're going to pass quotas for owls. Spotted owls good, barred owls bad. But the barred owls won't lose their constitutional rights. They'll kill them. They're going to kill 453 of them, dead as Jimmy Hoffa. Give me a break. I cannot think. This attempt, this is foolish, this is reckless, this is expensive, it's unsupported by evidence, it's unnecessary, and it won't work. And I cannot think of a better example of the arrogance, the hubris of the federal administrative state. This ranks right up there. If we let them go through with this will rank right up there with those $10,000 Department of Defense toilet seats. Except part of God's creation will already be dead. Ecosystems are like markets. They regulate themselves. Trying to change nature is like trying to have a federal government direct a free enterprise system. It won't work. It never has, and it never will. I don't mean any disrespect to anybody. I don't. I'm not, well, I guess I am calling somebody Elmer and Fudd. I don't know who they're going to hire, but I know they hired a bunch of Elmers and gave them $3,000 a bird, and it didn't work. But this to me is just bone deep, down to the marrow stupid. I do. And here's my advice to my friends of the Department of Interior. And I'm full disclosure, this thing's supported by President Biden's people, and it is supported by President Trump's people. Secretary Bergen loves this thing. He loves this idea like the devil loves sin. And he has the right to his opinion. But here's my advice. Life is hard. Life is hard. But it's a lot harder when you're stupid. Don't do it. Pass my resolution. And let's stop this. I suggest the absence of a quorum.
Will the senator withhold his request? The senator from Louisiana withhold his request?
Would I do what, Mr. President?
Will you please withhold your suggestion?
Of the absence of a quorum.
I'll do whatever you ask me to do, Mr. President, within reason.
Without objection. The senator from Idaho.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I rise in opposition to Senate Joint Resolution 81, which would terminate the rule of law national emergency declared with respect to Brazil. I agree with my colleagues that tariffs should be more targeted to avoid harm to Americans. I've made precisely that point at the Finance Committee meeting in May. We should consider more exemptions, whether for unavailable natural resources, capital equipment, or other key inputs. It's equally important that enforcement guidance provides the clarity that U.S. companies need to comply with tariffs and make critical business decisions. Similarly, as the administration continues to negotiate with our trading partners, I appreciate that my colleagues, as well as our constituents, may be nervous about what comes next. However, at this juncture, this resolution is counterproductive to helping American families and businesses of all sizes. The President's historic trade negotiations are bearing fruit. President Trump already announced new deals, trade deals, with major trading partners, including most recently Cambodia and Malaysia. Other such announcements may still be forthcoming. I urge other trading partners to reach similar trading deals. Consequently, Senate Joint Resolution 81 is counterproductive to the progress already made by President Trump and to new gains that he can still achieve in the ongoing negotiations with our trading partners. On April 30, the Senate rejected the joint resolution of disapproval on IEEPA-based reciprocal tariffs for the same reasons. And for these reasons, I urge my colleagues to oppose this resolution. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor. Absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Also-Brooks.
Mr. President.
Senator from Virginia.
Mr. President, I rise to conclude the discussion about the
senator's in a quorum call.
I would ask that the quorum call be suspended.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise to speak about the Brazilian tariff resolution that's before the body. And I will speak briefly since I spoke at 4:30 about it. The first point to mention, Mr. President, is this is a presidential invocation of a very rare emergency power. The IEEPA statute says that it has to be an unusual and extraordinary threat to the national security, foreign policy, or economy of the United States. And the president has to find the existence of such a threat. What has the president said about the threat posed by Brazil? What does that threat pose to the economy, national security, or foreign policy of the United States? The president has said it is Brazil's decision to prosecute its former president. Mr. President, if you surveyed the American public and asked them about the Brazilian prosecution of former President Bolsonaro, 99% of the American public wouldn't even know about it. How can this be a national emergency allowing the president to unilaterally impose a 50% tariff on goods from Brazil? We have a trade surplus with Brazil. $7 billion a year in goods, $23 billion a year in services. We have a trade surplus from Brazil. This president has said that their prosecution of a disgraced former politician is a national emergency for the United States. How could that be, Mr. President? If this is a national emergency for the United States, any president of any party could say that anything is a national emergency for the United States. So the first reason that I ask my colleagues to support this resolution is to not allow the president to end-run Congress and create a bogus emergency to unilaterally claim powers, in this case trade powers that are given to Congress in the Constitution. And the second reason, Mr. President, that I ask my colleagues to support this is that people are suffering. People are suffering. They're paying more for ground beef. A lot of ground beef comes from Brazil. They're paying more for coffee. The Americans are the biggest coffee drinkers in the world. Coffee is the biggest imported product agriculturally that we bring into this nation. Coffee prices have gone up by 40% in 1 year, from the end of September of 2024 to the end of September of 2025, because of President Trump's tariffs. 35% of our coffee comes from Brazil. 27% of our coffee comes from Colombia, being heavily tariffed right now. The third nation that grows coffee that comes to the United States is Vietnam, heavily affected by U.S. tariffs. People are suffering. They're paying more for food, more for clothes, more for health care, more for energy, more for building supplies because of President Trump's tariff policy. Trade is a power given to Congress in the Constitution that can be delegated to the president, but in statutes like IEEPA, we have retained the right. When a president is going the wrong direction and our constituents need someone to stand up for them so they don't pay more than they should for their morning cup of coffee or the hamburger that they're having, Congress has the power to roll that back and end these tariffs. So for those two reasons, the fact that this is not an emergency that would have ever been within the contemplation of those who drafted this statute, and second, to save Americans some money, to save them a few bucks when they buy their cup of coffee every day, I ask for support for this resolution, and I yield.
Democrat leader.
First, let me thank my good friend, the senator from Virginia, Senator Kaine, for his great work, not only on this proposal, but on so many. He has been a watchdog for the American people, for the American consumer. And when there's willy-nilly proposals that come out of Donald Trump's office and his head, whatever pops into his head, does such damage to the American people, Senator Kaine is the watchman at the gate, trying to preserve some sanity in our tariff policy and some reduced costs for the American people. Now, this week, the Democrats are forcing, as you can see, a series of votes here in the Senate to put an end to Donald Trump's reckless tariffs. 6 months ago, Trump promised liberation. Then he started a disastrous trade war that's brought chaos to the economy, confusion for small businesses, and higher costs for American families. A recent analysis showed that Americans are eating 90% of the total cost of Trump's tariffs. 90% is going right out of the pockets of the American family. That's not liberation. It's a national sales tax. That's what these tariffs are. It's a financial nightmare for working and middle-class households. So today, Democrats will present Republicans with a simple vote. Do you want lower costs for families? Or tie yourself to Donald Trump as he runs our economy into the dirt with his trade war. The first vote happening tonight is to end Trump's tariffs on Brazil. And once again, I thank Senator Kaine for his leadership on this resolution and speaking so urgently on the floor today. In July, Trump declared a national emergency to increase tariffs on Brazil to 50% using a totally bogus and ridiculous justification. The tariffs had nothing to do with improving trade relation with Brazil. We, in fact, have a trade surplus with Brazil. They had nothing to do with trying to lower costs for the American people. This was Trump. This is the kind of bull that comes out of his administration led by him. These tariffs were simply an attempt to bully Brazil into dropping corruption charges against Trump's MAGA buddy, former President Bolsonaro. And it's hurt Americans. It's hurt Americans. The price of coffee, and Brazil is our largest importer of coffee. We import more coffee from Brazil than any other place, 40% higher. Every American who wakes up in the morning to get a cup of Java is paying a price for Donald Trump's reckless, ridiculous, and almost childish tariffs. While Donald Trump uses his trade war to meddle in another country's politics, families at home are paying more and more for goods as commonplace, as I said, as coffee and lots of other produce as well. Because of Trump's tariffs, everyone's paying more for their morning cup of coffee. But Trump doesn't care that you're paying more for your coffee. He's more interested in helping corrupt foreign leaders get out of jail than he is in helping lower costs for Americans. And Americans know Donald Trump stabbing them in the back. He promised lower costs on day one, and instead costs have continued to go up. And it's one of the biggest reasons why his trade war is so unpopular. A recent CNBC poll showed 56% of Americans disapprove of Trump's tariffs, 56%. Today and through the rest of the week, we'll give our Republican colleagues a choice. Stand with Trump's idiotic, disastrous, and often juvenilely inspired tariffs, or stand with American families and vote to lower costs for the people back home. Because the longer these tariffs are in place, the more damage they will cause for our economy and the more money families back home will pay. So I urge my colleagues to vote yes on Tim Kaine's fine resolution and end Donald Trump's tariffs on Brazil. Yield the floor. Yield back all time.
Without objection. All time is yielded back. Under the previous order, the clerk will read the title of the joint resolution a third time.
Senate Joint Resolution 81, terminating the national emergency declared to impose duties on articles imported from Brazil.
The question occurs on the passage of the joint resolution. Is there a sufficient second? There appears to be. The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Alsobrooks, Ms. Baldwin, Mr. Banks, Mr. Barrasso, Mr. Bennett, Mrs. Blackburn, Mr. Blumenthal, Ms. Blunt-Rochester, Mr. Booker, Mr. Boozman, Mrs. Britt. That's quick. Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Budd. Ms. Cantwell. Mrs. Capito. Mr. Cassidy. Ms. Collins. Mr. Coons. Mr. Cornyn. Ms. Cortez Masto. Mr. Cotton. Mr. Kramer. Mr. Crapo. Mr. Cruz. Mr. Curtis. No. Mr. Daines. Ms. Duckworth. Mr. Durbin. Ms. Ernst. Mr. Fetterman. Mrs. Fisher. Mr. Gallego. Mrs. Gillibrand. Mr. Graham. Mr. Grassley. Mr. Haggerty. Thank you. Yep. Mr. Heinrich. Mr. Hickenlooper. Ms. Hirono. Mr. Hoven. Mr. Husted. Mrs. Hyde-Smith. Mr. Johnson. Mr. Justice. Mr. Kane. Mr. Kelly. Mr. Kennedy. Mr. Kim. Mr. King. Ms. Klobuchar. Mr. Langford. Mr. Lee. Mr. Lujan. Ms. Lummis. Mr. Markey. Mr. Marshall. Mr. McConnell. Mr. McCormick. Mr. Merkley. Mrs. Moody. Mr. Moran. Mr. Marino. Mr. Mullen. Ms. Murkowski. Mr. Murphy. Mrs. Murray. Mr. Ossoff. Mr. Padilla. Mr. Paul. Mr. Peters. Mr. Reed. Mr. Ricketts. Mr. Risch. Ms. Rosen. Mr. Rounds. Mr. Sanders. Mr. Schatz. Mr. Schiff. Mr. Schmidt. Mr. Schumer. Mr. Scott of Florida. Mr. Scott of South Carolina. Mrs. Shaheen. Mr. Sheehy. Ms. Slotkin. Ms. Smith. Mr. Sullivan. Mr. Thune. Mr. Tillis. Mr. Tuberville. Mr. Van Hollen. Mr. Warner. Mr. Warnock. Ms. Warren. Mr. Welch. Sir, thank you. Mr. Whitehouse. Mr. Wicker. Mr. Wyden. Mr. Young. Senators voting in the affirmative: Kane, Kim, Peters, Schumer, and Whitehouse. Senators voting in the negative: Britt, Cornyn, Cotton, Crapo, Curtis, Daines, Fisher, Hawley, Kennedy, Marshall, Moran, Tuberville, and Wicker. Ms. Hassan? Aye. Ms. Duckworth? Aye. Mr. Murphy? Aye. Mr. Ricketts? No. Mr. Schatz? Aye. Mr. Budd? No. Mrs. Blackburn? No. Ms. Lummis? No. Mr. Tillis? Was he a no? Yeah, I just did. Mr. Grassley? No. Mr. Durbin, aye. Mr. McCormick? No. Mr. Padilla, aye. Ms. Smith, aye. Mr. Tillis, aye. Mrs. Gillibrand, aye. Mr. Langford, no. Mr. Banks, no. Mr. Wyden, aye. Mr. Paul, aye. We'll just... Mr. Mullen, no. Ms. Murkowski, aye. Mr. Justice, no. Mr. Sheehy, aye. Mr. Sheehy, no. Mr. Heinrich, aye. Ms. Warren, aye. Ms. Hirono, aye. Mr. Scott of South Carolina, no. Mr. Cruz, no. Mr. Lee, no. Mrs. Murray, aye. Mr. Merkley, aye. Mr. Gallego, aye. Mr. Bennett, aye. Mr. Young, no. Mr. Fetterman, aye. Ms. Collins, aye. Mr. Barrasso, no. Mr. Reed, aye. Ms. Baldwin, aye. Mr. Schmidt, no. Mr. Scott of Florida, no. Mr. McConnell, aye. Mr. Bozeman, no. Mr. Graham? No. Ms. Cantwell? Aye. Mr. Ossoff? Aye. Mrs. Shaheen? Aye. Mrs. Hyde-Smith, no. Mr. Risch, no. Mr. Johnson, no. Mr. Coons, aye. Mr. Hickenlooper, aye. Mr. King, aye. I think that we should come in later because you're so tired. We'll just wait. Okay. All right. Thank you. Were these renumbered properly? Okay. Oh, right. Mr. Sanders, aye. Ms. Alsobrooks, aye. Mr. Sullivan, no. Mr. Kelly, aye. Mr. Warnock, aye. Mr. Markey? Aye. Mr. Schiff? Aye. Ms. Cortez Masto? Aye. Mr. Cassidy, no. Mr. Kramer, no. Mr. Booker, aye. Mr. Warner, aye. Ms. Blunt Rochester, aye. Mr. Van Hollen, aye. Ms. Klobuchar, aye. Yes. Mr. Lujan, aye. Mr. Marino, no. Mr. Hoeven, no. Mr. Blumenthal, aye. Mr. Rounds, no. Ms. Slotkin, aye. Oh, Mr. Welch, aye. Ms. Rosen, aye. Mr. Husted, no. Thank you. Mrs. Moody, no. Mrs. Capito? No. Adam, do you need to see the names? Adam, do you need to see the names? Mr. Thune? No.
On this vote, the yeas are 52 and the nays are 48, and the joint resolution is passed.
they handed in?
Yes.
Go ahead. Yeah.
I need to do one more thing, I'm sorry.
We good? You handed in? Mr. President.
Mr. Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I move to proceed to executive session to consider executive calendar number 370.
Questions on the motion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those no. Ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. The motion is agreed to. Clerk will report the nomination.
Nomination, the Judiciary, Joshua D. Dunlap of Maine to be United States Circuit Judge for the First Circuit.
Mr. President, I send a cloture motion to the desk.
Clerk will report.
Cloture motion, we, the undersigned senators, in accordance with the provisions of Rule 22 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, do hereby move to bring to a closed debate on the nomination of Joshua D. Dunlap of Maine to be United States Circuit Judge for the First Circuit, signed by 17 senators as follows.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the reading of the names be waived.
Without objection.
And I ask unanimous consent that the Senate be in a period of morning business with senators permitted to speak therein for up to 10 minutes each.
Without objection.
And I ask unanimous consent that the Committee on Environment and Public Works be discharged from further consideration. The Senate now proceed to S-Res 454.
The clerk will report.
S-Res 454, expressing support for the designation of the week of October 24, 2025 to October 31, 2025 as Bat Week.
Without objection, the committee is discharged, and the Senate will proceed.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the resolution be agreed to, the preamble be agreed to, and the motion to reconsider be considered, made, and laid upon the table.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to the consideration of S-Res 471, which is at the desk.
Clerk will report.
S-Res 471, calling on Congress, schools, and state and local educational agencies to recognize the significant educational implications of dyslexia and so forth.
Without objection, the Senate will proceed.
Mr. President, I ask consent, unanimous consent, the resolution be agreed to, the preamble be agreed to, and the motion to reconsider be considered, made, and laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I have 4 requests for committees to meet during today's session. The Senate, they have the approval of the majority and minority leaders.
Duly noted.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that when the Senate completes its business today, it stand adjourned until 10 a.m. on Wednesday, October the 29th. That following the prayer and pledge, the journal proceedings be approved today at the morning hour be deemed expired. The time for the 2 leaders be reserved for the use later in the day, and the Senate be in a period of morning business with senators permitted to speak therein for up to 10 minutes each. And if Senator Sullivan makes a motion to proceed to S.J. Res 80, the Senate vote on the motion at 11:30 a.m. And if agreed to, all time be deemed expired. The Senate vote on passage no earlier than Thursday, October the 30th. And following the vote on the motion to proceed to S.J. Res 80, the Senate execute the order of October 28th in relation to executive calendar number 457, I should say, Edmund G. LaCour, Jr. Further, if Senator Kennedy makes a motion to proceed to S.J. Res 69, the Senate vote on the motion at 2:15 p.m.
Without objection.
Mr. President, for the information of my colleagues, the senators should expect 2 votes at 11:30 a.m., 1 vote at 2:15 p.m., and the further vote later in the afternoon. If there's no further business to come before the Senate, I ask that it stand adjourned under the previous order following the remarks of Senator Blumenthal.
Without objection.
Mr. President.
Senator from Connecticut.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, as everyone in this chamber knows, and everyone in our great nation knows, we're in the midst of a health care crisis. Now, the word crisis is probably the most overused term in political lexicon. But the American people know that this crisis is real and urgent because they know if you don't have your health, you don't have anything. That old saying epitomizes the importance of health care when it affects our children who can't get health care for themselves, our seniors who also depend on others, and everyday Americans across the country who are at their kitchen tables tonight or at their workplaces with their families wondering, when will it happen? When will I get sick? Not just a virus or a common cold. When will there be a healthcare crisis for me? And it happens to everybody. Nobody is invincible. Everybody needs health care, and it should be regarded as a human right. And we face an imminent and real and present crisis right now for millions of Americans who will no longer be able to afford health care insurance, beginning in days or weeks, because premiums are skyrocketing. They will rise by double or triple what they are now. Insurance companies are already raising premium rates. Americans are beginning the period of open enrollment. In Connecticut, it begins on November 1st, when they'll have to make choices, literally, in effect, writing checks to insurance companies and saying, I am going to afford this plan. But many Americans will find no plan affordable if we fail to provide for them an extension of the health care tax credits that have enabled them to afford health insurance up to now under a measure that we passed and the president signed. My Republican colleagues continue to ignore the needs and interests of the American people by blocking our efforts to fix this imminent, immediate crisis. The Republican-controlled House of Representatives is out of town. The president is out of touch in Asia. And we are left with a clock ticking. Time is not on our side. And let's be very clear. Republicans control the House of Representatives, which hasn't shown up to work in over a month, but they continue to be paid. Republicans control the Senate, and maybe most importantly, Republicans control the White House. This government shutdown is happening on President Trump's watch. It is on him. These skyrocketing health care costs are happening on his watch, too. And instead of fighting for the American people, President Trump and Republicans have spent the past year seeking to strip millions of Americans of health care, food assistance, student loan support, and much more that is vital to their quality of life and, for many of them, their very survival. Democrats have been sounding the alarm over the ongoing threats to health care and the impact it will have on every American, but Republicans seemingly, I say seemingly, refuse to listen. I think they are listening, but are in denial. Because instead of working with Democrats to prevent Americans from being crushed by impending medical debt, Republicans have wasted valuable time blocking every single Democratic effort to lower costs for families. To be clear, if Republicans refuse to join Democrats in protecting the American people from massive increases in their health care costs, millions of people will suffer. Health care premiums will rise to incomprehensible levels. Just this week, Connecticut launched a window shopping tool that allows residents to preview their health care options for next year. It allows consumers to see how costs compare to next year's costs. Very frankly, the options are preposterous. For example, a couple in their 60s living in Hartford, Connecticut, our capital, making $100,000 a year, will go from paying $260.83 to $2,614.60. That's for the same plan. It's an Anthem plan. They're going from the cost this year of $260.83 to next year, $2,614.60. And by the way, they're getting nothing more. It's the same plan, no additional coverage, and they're paying over $2,500 more for each month. It is, in effect, a Republican health care tax. A Republican health care tax on a family in their 60s making $100,000 a year. That's a middle-class family in Hartford, Connecticut. Let me give you another example. A family of 4 living in Hartford making $159,767, roughly $160,000 a year. The average salary for a family of 4 in our state would be forced to pay $1,159.52 more. They go from $796.65 this year to $1,956.17 last year. I don't know how they can afford it. And the simple answer is probably they can't. And that family will be at risk of financial catastrophe without health care insurance coverage. Already, let me just emphasize, already, health care debt is the major cause of bankruptcy in this country. It hurts our whole economy. So even if you don't care about a family of 4 living in Hartford or a couple in their 60s, even if the humanitarian impacts are impervious to you, think about the economic consequences. Think about your pocketbook, not theirs. Bankruptcy will increase along with the suffering. These Trump price hikes, the taxes on health care, are absolutely absurd and abhorrent. It's incomprehensible to expect any American enrolled in one of these plans to have the disposable income necessary to keep their coverage. This added cost is money that could be used to cover weeks' worth of groceries, heat, rental, or mortgage. This added cost is money that many individuals and families simply don't have. They won't pay these prices because they simply cannot. Instead, many will be forced to go without health insurance, which raises the costs for everyone. And very bluntly, these rates will not just impact people enrolled in the ACA marketplace. If Republicans have their way, the entire healthcare system will feel the effects, and every individual trying to receive care, regardless of what kind of insurance they have, will be impacted. The ripple effect is coming to you. Even if you don't have an ACA plan, even if you are paying some part of your employer's insurance costs. This rising tide will truly lift everybody's boat in terms of cost. Republicans are making Connecticut families and Americans across the country choose between affordable health care or putting food on the table or heating their homes this winter or buying clothes for their kid. It's cruel, it's unnecessary, it will undoubtedly cost people their health and their lives. Open enrollment is less than 5 days away now in Connecticut. Time is not on our side. We have no time to waste. If you don't feel this sense of urgency, listen to your constituents. I choose to stand with them, with small business owners, with working families, with everyday Americans who will be crushed by these costs, and their futures will be crippled, at least financially. Paramount, in my mind, is that Republican colleagues listen to those constituents, to those small business owners, to those families, and millions of Americans and healthcare professionals who have been speaking truth to power. This government shutdown can end tonight if we choose the path forward to guarantee an extension of the health care tax credits and add it to the government funding measure that is now before this body. The House of Representatives needs to come back to do its job. President Trump will come back from Asia, and the American people deserve a real solution that preserves American health care. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Under the previous order, the Senate stands adjourned until 10 a.m. tomorrow.